Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Susan Bailey, and I'm an author, singer, and songwriter. I wrote a book back in 2015 called River of Grace, Creative Passages Through Difficult Times. And it's become apparent to me that even though this book is 6 years old, it has many relevant themes for today and the terrible pandemic that we've all been experiencing. So I'd like to share my thoughts with you about this book and how it might be able to help. Now, some of you may know me. I'm a blogger for Louisa May Alcott, and as you can see, I'm wearing my Louisa May Alcott t-shirt. And I've been blogging about her for the last 11 years. I bet you didn't know that this has a lot to do with that blog. I also have another blog called beasone.org, where I just put up personal thoughts about my faith life and just about how I feel about life. So I'd like to share with you now some thoughts about the River of Grace. I invite you now on a journey of grace in word and in song. As I speak, imagine grace as a river, sometimes still and peaceful, other times roaring and rough. You're on that river, maybe in a kayak or a canoe, or you're floating downstream in a rubber inner tube on a hot summer's day. There are times when you will run into white waters, but fear not. God's grace will not let you drown. I learned to say yes to grace and let it change me, even though it took me through some of the most challenging moments of my life. There were many times when I was traveling blind, without understanding, relying purely on trust. It was a time of suffering and transformation and a time of self-discovery. It was a time of death, but followed by new life. We need to meditate upon such themes, and there's no doubt that these themes are right in our faces right now with this pandemic. They are experiences our world would rather avoid. Suffering holds no value. People do everything they can to run away from it, but it still comes. The instinct is to fight it, but God calls us instead to embrace it. Follow the path of Calvary as Jesus did and bear the weight of our crosses. Suffering is a powerful and creative force that cuts deep and reveals the truth about ourselves. If we embrace our suffering rather than fight it, we will discover the self that God means for us to be. The self described in Psalm 139. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Suffering involves loss. Loved ones become sick and die, often without warning. We confront our aging and health challenges, facing our mortality and losing parts of ourselves in the process. Our children may be in trouble. We endure financial difficulties. A good friend is in dire need. The list goes on and we have all experienced loss and the grief that follows. A mysterious process. Grief is capricious. It is powerful and willful, showing up when we least expect it, expressing itself in ways we could never have imagined. Each loss produces its own unique grief experience. No matter how many times we have mourned a loss, the experiences will be new. But grief can also create new life if we allow it to happen, gaining insight and wisdom. New paths can open up and beckon, leading us perhaps to travel, take up a meaningful hobby, or pursue creative expression. We mourn the empty nest only to delight in weddings and grandchildren. Many of us experience a deeper awareness of God within. All of you I know devote yourselves to beautiful acts of service. Get daring even, looking at this phase of our lives as a new adventure. Even in the throes of illness, we can find new purpose. Like all of you, I have experienced several losses. My dad died in 2003 after a brief illness. My mom passed away 7 years later, her spirit broken by his death. In that same year, I temporarily lost my singing voice. Financial difficulties continued to plague us. As our children began to leave home, the reality of being an empty nester hit me hard. Recently, it has been the COVID-19 pandemic. Several family members caught the virus, but fortunately no one died. But the sudden changes to daily life and the prolonged isolation uncovered chronic medical issues with which I had to grapple. All these changes prompted an unexpected journey, forcing me to dive deep within myself. But this is not meant to be just about my experience. What happened to me can happen to any of us if we allow God's river of grace to carry us. So what made me equate grace with the river? We moved from Westborough, Massachusetts to North Grafton, the next town over, in 2004. Actually, a direct result of my grief following my father's passing. I'll explain that in a few moments. As part of the Blackstone River Valley, rivers, lakes, and streams surround us. My husband, Rich, thought we should take up kayaking as we both love the water. A wonderful thing happened whenever we took out the boat. We experienced a sense of harmony otherwise lacking in our marriage. Rich and I tend to compete with each other. How many husbands and wives do that? Which caused a lot of bickering. Yet in the kayak, we worked as a team, finding ourselves in perfect agreement. Kayaking made us feel peaceful and content. I would daydream about it on the days we didn't go out, and sometime, somewhere along the way, change took place. I'd like to read from you now, from my book, River of Grace, about this change. Somewhere along the way, I learned to see God in the natural world around me. Because of this, I began to attribute the harmony between Rich and myself in the kayak as coming from God. In meditating on the experience of the river, I heard the invitation from God, asking me to let Him be the guiding current in my life. Obedience has been a word I have long associated with no, but now it had changed to yes. Yes to partnering with God in something wonderful and life-giving. Indeed, God could teach me something profound through a simple kayak. I was now conscious of grace in my life, but even before I recognized it, grace had carried me. In 2003, my dad was diagnosed with a stage 4 brain tumor. A botched biopsy resulted in bleeding on his brain. Daddy lost his ability to communicate. For a time, he was literally out of his mind. During the next 4 months, we traveled the chaotic white waters of doctors, good and bad, hospitals, medical insurance, nursing homes, home care. Daddy died at home on December 18th, surrounded by his family. Now, none of us had had any experience with death like this. It was wrenching, and I was soon to learn that my grief would express itself in a most unusual fashion. Soon after Daddy's passing, I felt the urge to sell our condominium. Before his death, I never thought it possible to buy a house due to years of financial difficulty, yet I could not stop thinking about it. I approached our pastoral associate, Father Stephen, and asked him if this was normal. He assured me that it was. In fact, it's quite common for people who are grieving to make a substantial change in their lives. He referred me to a grief counselor who assured me it was okay to move ahead with our plans. We sold our condo in one day and bought our wonderful house in Grafton, moving in 1 year after Daddy passed. I felt his spirit with us, pleased and proud of our accomplishment. I'd wander through the rooms, overcome with gratitude that God was allowing this change to happen. Grief had taken me on an unexpected journey. While I did cry over my dad and sometimes felt immobilized by my sadness, I also took action to make our lives better. I never ever before considered myself to be an action-oriented person, but grief taught me new things about myself. And by taking that initiative, I was able to give our family a fresh start. If we hadn't bought the house, we never would have taken up kayaking, and I never would have learned about the River of Grace. I let God love me by agreeing to go on the confusing and mysterious grief journey after my dad died. And because of that, I learned to read between the lines and see God in places I had never seen him before. I'd like now to share a song with you. It's called Will You Teach Me? And it describes that experience of that reading between the lines, seeing God in our ordinary lives. Years after my father passed away, my mother died. Distraught after losing her husband of 50-plus years, she slowly declined. She isolated herself from her friends and her Unitarian church community and had no faith to console her. Fueling her feelings of anger and terror was the onset of dementia. I watched in horror as Mommy declined. She had been my best friend and confidant, and slowly her essence was dying. Unlike my older sister and brother, I was not a take-charge person. Instead, fear froze me in place. Gently, my sister convinced me that the best thing I could do for Mommy was to listen to her, keep her company, and take care of those little things that meant so much to her, like the food shopping. I did not understand at the time just how important my role was as consoler. I found I couldn't pray for help, except to pray for her soul. Yet, Grace stepped up, and I'd like to share with you a paragraph from my book which describes this experience. Grace is fueled by love. Love can overcome fear if we face that fear head on. Spending more time with my mother reminded me of my love for her, giving me the strength to forget my fear. In time, I began to find little ways to help. I was able to interpret her random thoughts and help her express herself as dementia ate away at her ability to remember words. As I mentioned, I took over the grocery shopping. I told her I loved her. I visited her regularly, even as fear and dread accompanied me. I prayed for her constantly. I handled the funeral arrangements and sang her favorite song at the service. Mommy died in April 2010. I experienced so many graces that I knew God had heard my prayers. Her funeral was a time of joy amid the sorrow, with friends and family and neighbors spontaneously expressing their love through testimonials. I'd like to share with you now the song that I sang at my mother's funeral. You might say this song is the Be Not Afraid of the Unitarian Church, meaning it's an extremely popular song in that church. It's called Spirit of Life, and I really feel it embodies my mother's spirit.
Spirit of life, come unto me, sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free, Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Come to me, come to me. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
It was the only cry pain or death had wrung from him, only boon he had asked, and none of us could grant it. The first red streak of dawn was warming the gray east, a herald of the coming sun. John saw it, and with the love of light which lingers in us to the end, seemed to read in it a sign of hope, of help. For over his whole face there broke that mysterious expression, brighter than any smile, which often comes to eyes that look their last. He laid himself gently down, and lapsed into a merciful unconsciousness, which assured us that for him suffering was forever past. He died then, for though the heavy breaths still tore their way up a little while longer, they were but the waves of an ebbing tide that beat unfelt against the wreck, which an immortal voyager had deserted with a smile. He never spoke again, but to the end held my hand close, so close that when he was asleep at last I could not draw it away. Dan helped me, warning me as he did, so that it was unsafe for dead and living flesh to lie so long together. But though my hand was strangely cold and stiff, and 4 white marks remained across its back, even when warmth and color had returned elsewhere, I could not but be glad that through its touch, presence of human sympathy, perhaps, had lightened that hard us out. Now, this book, the purpose of this book was to pair together scripture readings with passages from literature. And so this is the scripture reading that I paired with this passage. It's from Matthew 25, verses 37 through 40. Then those sheep are going to say, Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we ever see you sick or in prison and come to you? And then the king will say, I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it to me. My interest in Louisa May Alcott eventually led to writing a blog dedicated to her life and works, which led to writing these 2 books. I'd never imagined myself as an author, but grief had taken my dormant creative life and caused it to blossom in ways I could never have imagined. Having done so little reading and having no formal education in writing, I doubted my abilities. Becoming a writer required total trust in God, so I continued to allow him to lead me by his grace. Reading and writing, however, were not the only new developments. 2 weeks after my mother's funeral, I noticed that our parish nurse was looking for someone to bring communion to a woman living in Grafton in our church bulletin. Something told me to answer that call. I had only just begun to learn the importance of being present to someone who was ill through my mother. Now I was learning from my new spiritual mother, Jackie, just how vital and life-giving those actions can be. Jackie and I hit it off immediately. We shared things we had never shared with anyone else. Her wisdom is profound yet simple, and the example of her life has taught me more than I could ever convey here. Our weekly and lengthy visits, sometimes we call them our overnights, helped me to process everything I had experienced during my mother's illness and death. If it weren't for Jackie, there would be no River of Grace. As one who is homebound, Jackie's life is hidden and small by the world's standard. But in God's eyes, it's enormous. The many who know her are well aware of her impact. I am humbled to be in the presence of someone who exemplifies sacrificial love. Her love for Jesus and Mary has deepened my faith. She's made it possible for me to see Jesus close up in the tabernacle, to bathe in the blessings of frequent and close proximity to the Eucharist. Again, the River of Grace led me to an unexpected place. Wonderful place. Place I never would have known were it not for saying yes to that invitation extended through my grief journey. Grief, however, was about to throw me a curveball. Never presume for a moment that you can predict where it will take you next. A few months after my mom died, I lost my singing voice due to acid reflux, likely brought on by the stress of caring for her. It began as a weakness, My voice would fail me at the most inopportune moments, like in the middle of singing "O Holy Night," as I always did to our family at our Christmas parties, or in front of the congregation at Mass. Singing in public, which had always been as easy as breathing, became terrifying, and I had to pull out. For some reason, I couldn't wait to step away from singing. I wanted to get as far away from music as I could get. I confess that I was ungracious during that time. People were so kind in offering their encouragement, consolation, but I wanted nothing to do with it. Any reminder, even kind words and gestures from others, made me angry. I was fighting the river of grace, but I deluded myself into thinking I wasn't. After all, I'd accepted my singing voice was gone, hadn't I? I was eager to pursue my reading and writing, and wasn't that where God wanted me to go? Grief can be ugly if we fight it. Looking back upon that time, I cringe at what I felt inside whenever anyone brought up music. How could I have been so ungrateful to God and everyone I had sung for? But God didn't abandon me. In 2013, I went to Mass at Holy Family Parish in Worcester, where Father Stephen was then pastor. It was the feast of St. Blaise, and Father Stephen was blessing throats. I got into line for the blessing, but honestly, I had no idea why I was there. I almost got out of the line, but something told me to stay. After he blessed my throat, I started crying, but I had no idea why. But this is what happened as a result. A few days later, my son started asking me about the collection of songs I had written long ago. He is a songwriter as well, playing in a band and recording. He knew I had written those songs when I was his age, and he wanted me to send them to him. I pulled out the cassettes and started listening. The songs sounded better than I originally thought. Slowly, I began to remember why I had fallen in love with music in the first place. I sent him the songs, and he listened. This led to many wonderful conversations about music, and it felt like a soothing balm. Listening to my old songs again, reliving the memories, and then sharing all of this with my son began the process of reconciliation. Instead of being raw and fragmented, I began to feel whole. A sense of wonder and deep gratitude welled up inside. Following Sunday, as I entered that church to go to Mass, I was immediately struck with the knowledge that I had received a significant healing with that throat blessing. I couldn't wait to tell the priest. Thereafter, during Mass, I noticed that it became easier to sing the hymns. Buoyed, I pushed my voice a bit further each week. One day, while driving home from Mass, I sang some of the most challenging songs in my repertoire, including "I Know That My Redeemer Liveth" from Handel's Messiah, and discovered to my delight that I could sing them just as I had before. My voice had been restored. I had received a physical healing along with an emotional and spiritual healing. Now I'd like to share a song with you. Granted, the arrangement to this song is pretty corny, but I love this song, and it just makes me very happy when I sing it. It's how I feel now when I sing, and so I'd like to share it with you now. It will be familiar to you. It's called "How Can I Keep From Singing?"
Tale
you can see, grief is quite the teacher. And whether you want it or not, you're put on a path to change. As you can see, sometimes I went willingly and other times not at all. It came down to trust in God's grace. Beautiful things happened when I let that river of grace lead me, as it did with buying our house and becoming a writer. Grief had brought about new life. When I did not trust in grace and fought it, grace made me bitter, frustrated, and ungrateful. God is not often explicit when asking us to do something. Sometimes the invitations he offers seem vague, as in the case of having my throat blessed. But all it took was saying yes to that invitation to let that healing process happen. Grief proved to be a creative force in my life. It is of God. It is redemptive suffering, the kind Jesus embraced to free us from our sin. Suffering has a way of forcing us to confront our true selves. Grief caused me to dive deep down inside and discover what God meant for me to be. Had I not agreed to allow grief to take me where it will, I never would have become a writer. I never would have received the healing that restored my singing voice. And I would have missed out on the amazing experience of knowing that I am a beloved child of God. River of Grace documents these experiences. Perhaps they reflect your own experience and feelings. One thing, however, is sure. All of us around the world have undergone this COVID-19 pandemic. Each of us has a story to tell. Some of you lost family and friends to the virus. You could not visit them in the hospital or nursing home. Funerals were postponed. Others of you had adverse reactions to either the virus or the vaccination. And many suffered depression and anxiety due to the prolonged isolation. Remember when churches were closed and we couldn't receive the sacraments? There was nothing about life anymore that was familiar or comforting. It was the profound change that caused great anxiety and depression in me. Those feelings manifested themselves in my body, shaking uncontrollably. In the midst of this, I lost my job of 27 years. It was as if a large, insurmountable concrete wall was blocking my way, and my face was pressed up against it. The only answer was to proceed blindly, allowing the river of grace to lead me bit by bit. During this time, I was treated for anxiety and depression, and I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. The message from God was clear. My life was going to change profoundly. After much prayer and soul searching, I decided at 65 years old to retire. I grieved for my old life. It took a long time to accept these changes, and I still backslide every now and then. In the end, just as before, the river of grace flooded me with blessings, deepening my relationship with God in ways I could never have imagined. I lead a quiet and meaningful life serving the church, reading and writing, exercising, visiting with family and friends. My greatest joy is the amount of time I can spend lingering in prayer with our Lord. Living through loss, grief, and change takes time, and only you and God can know how to proceed on your journey. No one can hurry us along. The process must play out as it was meant to do. But if we allow grace to lead us, such suffering will bring new life and give it meaning. Jesus suffered, died, and rose to new life, so that we could experience new life too. Resurrection is not just for when we die. We can rise to new life every day. I'd like to close this presentation with a song called Touch the Sky, which I think embodies this feeling.
My arms outstretched await you. Spread your wings and fly, for I will lift you up, and you will touch the sky. Although I am so fearful, shall fly across the sky with wings of joy to lift you higher. You can be strong, for your heart longs to trust in me, my child. Then you shall fly across the skies with wings of joy to lift you higher. You can be strong, for you belong to me. My arms outstretched await you. Spread your wings and fly, for I will lift you up, and you will touch the sky.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. I hope that you will consider purchasing my book, River of Grace. You can find it on the Ave Maria Press website, avemariapress.com, and in the search bar just put River of Grace, Susan Bailey, and you will find the book. I hope it will bring blessings to you, perhaps some understanding about what you've been going through. And share it with friends who might need it too. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention. God bless you.